Good evening, folks. This is your ticker guy coming at you with birth certificate update again. I've superseded the previous video because we got a lot of people that do not believe. Look, grab a copy of Illustrator yourself and check this out on your own, okay? Take the original document, go through it on your own and see what you see, because it's the only way you're ever going to be convinced. You should not take my word for it. You shouldn't take anybody else's word for it. You should do the investigation yourself, draw your own conclusions after doing that investigation. It's the only way that you're going to have any kind of reasonable belief here. I want to show you what I'm talking about, though. Guys, I don't see how you could possibly have generated this from a scan. All right, remember, this bent paper here is from a piece of paper that's in a book being put on a glass and photocopied. If you doubt that it will do this, go to the library, go where you have a scanner at work or whatever, go ahead and run a scan yourself and check this stuff out on your own. You'll see that this is exactly what happens. The text bends. And what we have here in this case is we have the bending of the guidelines here in the box, all right, and they form a parallel line with the base of the word sex. And they should, because this is printed on the piece of paper. It bends at the same time the paper does, and therefore the lines in the print must bend by the exact same amount. You got the same situation down here. You got a guide here. This angle is approximately parallel here. You got approximately parallel lines in this case. This is a little harder to get exactly right because I've got a much tougher time getting the correct pixel locations in order to make sure that this lines up correctly. But it's very close to being parallel. Now look at the word male. This is straight, folks. If I look at this, here's the top line 281.75 on the Y pixel, 281.69. It's essentially a straight line across. All right, these were drawn freehand, no help. 288.56 and 288.56 is 0. All right, so what I've got here is I've got a word that shows no evidence of actually having been on the page that was bent at the time that the paper was put onto the glass and copied. This was put on this document afterwards. There's absolutely no way you can possibly explain this happening other than that. Now let's go down here and look at line 6C here, the hospital, because the same thing's occurring here. I've got a parallel line here between this point on this guide and this point on this guide. It happens to be parallel with the bottom, the registration on the word name. And again, same reason. This is printed on the piece of paper. As it wraps, you get a little bit of distortion, and that's what happens. I got the same parallel line here on the bottom guideline. All right, so I've got these three all line up. But what's going on here with the word Kapiolani, maternity, and gynecological? Well, that's very interesting, because when I look at this, look at what I got here. All right, this is absolutely straight. There's no evidence of this at all. And to put this in perspective, folks, notice that name is canted, but right here is where this ends. Okay, at this point is where we now have the paper in contact with glass. There's no more bending here. And the rest of this print is absolutely straight. The bottom line is in perfect registration. And if I look at the top line of Kapiolani, maternity, and gynecological, it is in registration with this line with the bottom of this. The problem is this part of the word all the way up to at least the A and probably the P should not be, and yet they are. So there's no evidence that this is actually bent around. What you should actually see here is somewhere around the end of the A, basically from the P on, this should be in registration, but there should be the bottom of the K should dip down a little bit, and it does not. Now, this is less convincing than male because there are fewer letters involved, but the same thing applies, folks. This is out of registration with what you should see if this was bent around the corner of the page. All right, very clever little optical illusion that you have here when you first look at this without putting these actual guides up here. You can't see whether or not that is in fact the case. The other thing that's interesting about the K is that if you look at Kapiolani, you say, well, that really isn't out of registration, but in fact it is, because here's the bottom of the K here, and you can see there's an optimization pixel that's been turned on down here. If you actually come across here from this part of the foot of the K and this part, this is the correct registration line here, this straight line. There's no bending to this at all. If this was out of registration, you should see a little bit of that. The other thing that's interesting about this is that when you look at the tops of these capital letters, the thing that you see with capital letters is that there's an overthrow of the box that they're in, so to speak. In other words, they go right to the edge. And again, if I look at this, I see that I got the same consistency here. If I I pull this across at 0 degrees, you'll see I got the same basic thing going on here all the way across. All right, there's nothing out of registration here at all. In fact, this is exactly spot on. So those of you that don't believe, folks, maybe you will now. If you won't, well, then you don't. These are, by the way, the only two lines where this works. If I go down here and I look at Barack, people have asked about that. This is into the area, this red line is into the area where it's straight. So you would not expect at this point to see the canting, and in fact you don't. If you look here, Barack is lined up. This is congruent here. So you have parallel lines here. There's no canting that's obvious in this. Looks perfectly okay, but it should look okay because the actual point where you start to see the distortion and the bending happens very close to the edge of this word full, and beyond this point. So you would not expect to see the wrap effect on the letters of the name. And of course below here there's nothing. But again, if I look at the rest of these, if I go down here and I look at these, I got the same thing. All right, I got some evidence of some bending here. I can come down here and I can look at these other parts of the certification, and I will see the same sort of thing. All right, there's distortion here, and if I lay these down and I take a look at this level, you'll see that these are not straight. Okay, there's an angle to them, and that's going to be true for all of these as we get into this area where the actual text is bent. All right, that's it, folks. There's no way. Look, if you can explain how this happens and how this happens, have at it. The only way I can explain it is that those were put on this document after it was scanned. They were not part of the actual text that was scanned up and originally delivered. Have a good day.